You're fired.
2 words. 30 years down the drain. I'm standing in sloppy snow, truck engine still running, road salt burning my eyes. Just spent 4 hours digging out fire trucks, clearing paths for ambulances, saving actual lives. HOA. President Vivian Sterling struts over in her designer heels like she owns the world.
We hired Premier Property Services. Lower bid, better documentation.
Lower bid? My blood turns to ice.
You're replacing me with the cheapest option?
More cost-effective.
That smirk could cut glass. I stare at this woman, this penny-pinching executive who's never touched a snow shovel, firing the guy who just cleared her neighbor's driveway so his dying wife could get to the hospital. 30 years of perfect service tossed for a few dollars savings. Cost-effective? I laugh, tasting diesel and betrayal, cold wind cutting through my jacket. Lady, you just bought yourself a disaster. Little did she know, karma was about to deliver the most expensive lesson of her life. What's your worst cheapskate boss story? Drop it below. Meet Ezra Blackwood, 3rd generation of keeping Pennsylvania from becoming a frozen graveyard. My grandfather started with a beat-up Ford and a snowblade welded by his drinking buddy. My father built it into something respectable. My brother Magnus was supposed to inherit after his army tour. Magnus never made it home from Afghanistan. So here I am at 45, running Blackwood Brothers Snow and Ice with 3 guys who've bled diesel fuel for 20 years. Tony, my lead driver, lost 2 fingers to frostbite saving a diabetic kid during the blizzard of '09. Rick handles salt distribution with the precision of a pharmacist. Eddie's our mechanic, can rebuild a transmission in a snowstorm using duct tape and prayer. Our trucks aren't pretty, reeking of road salt and determination, but we've never missed a storm, never left a neighbor to die, never charged extra for Christmas Eve miracles. Millbrook Estates has been our bread and butter since '94. 47 homes nestled in rolling hills, split between old-timers who remember when this was dairy country, and newcomers chasing historic charm. Dorothy Finch, 83, bakes cookies for my crew every December. Harold Martinez runs the volunteer fire department from his kitchen table. The Kowalski family's been here since the mills ran. Real Pennsylvania stock, who understand what winter solidarity means. Then, Vivian Sterling bought the mill owner's mansion for cash. Sterling's a pharmaceutical sales executive, the kind who convinces hospital administrators to switch medication suppliers for better cost management. She moved here from corporate suburbia, driving a BMW X7, all sharp suits and sharper ambitions. 52 years old with the aggressive confidence of someone who spent decades manipulating people in white coats. Within 6 months, she'd infiltrated the HOA board like a virus. Within 12, she was president, promising to bring professional management to community operations. Her first target? Every handshake deal that kept this place running smoothly. The landscaper who'd cut grass for 15 years? Replaced by a company from 2 counties over that charged double and showed up half as often. The local handyman who'd fixed porches for beer money, fired for lacking proper contractor licensing and insurance documentation. When old Pete Kowalski announced his retirement from snow removal after 4 decades, Sterling circled like a corporate shark smelling blood. "We need to modernize winter services," she declared at October's HOA meeting. The community center reeked of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner, fluorescent lights humming overhead like angry wasps. Rain drummed against windows while Sterling clicked her manicured nails against the folding table, each tap sharp as breaking ice. Professional standards, comprehensive liability coverage, competitive bidding processes. I slouched in back, steel-toed boots still caked with mud from checking equipment, watching this pharmaceutical predator dissect my family's legacy with surgical precision. My bid was clean, $8,500 seasonal, same rate for 3 decades. Emergency response, path clearing, enough rock salt to keep roads safer than state highways. Premier Property Services submitted their proposal at $6,200. Marcus Webb, Premier's owner, looked like he'd stepped off a construction site catalog. New hard hat, spotless work boots, clipboard thick with insurance certificates. He'd driven down from Lancaster County promising state-of-the-art equipment and digital service tracking. His trucks gleamed like they'd never seen real weather. $6,000 to protect 47 families through Pennsylvania winter. to keep ambulances moving when seconds separate life and death. The math didn't work unless you cut corners that kill people. Dorothy Finch raised her weathered hand. Ezra's daddy started here before half these houses existed. Why abandon loyalty for a few saved dollars? Sterling's smile could have frozen antifreeze. Mrs. Finch, sentiment doesn't protect residents from liability lawsuits. Premier offers modern accountability and professional presentation that reflects our community standards. The vote was 4-3. Sterling's Transplant Coalition versus neighbors who remembered what community meant. Walking out into October air, sharp with wood smoke and betrayal, I knew she'd just signed death warrants for every elderly resident in those hills. Because when winter comes calling, cheap contractors don't answer. November hit Millbrook Estates like a freight train, carrying 6 inches of "we told you so." I was nursing my morning coffee at 5 a.m., watching weather radar paint our county white when the calls started. Not from Sterling. She'd made it clear my unprofessional services were history. These calls came from neighbors who remembered what competent snow removal looked like. Ezra? Dorothy Finch, I hate bothering you, but it's 8 a.m. and nobody's touched our driveways. Harold Martinez has dialysis at 10, and his wife can't get their car out. The bitter irony tasted stronger than my coffee. I'd watched Premier Property Services promise comprehensive coverage and professional response times during that October meeting. Funny how professional response doesn't include showing up. By noon, Premier's crew finally rolled in. 2 trucks that looked like they'd been rescued from a junkyard, driven by kids who probably thought snow removal meant shoveling their own sidewalks. The lead driver couldn't have been older than 25, scraping our asphalt with his plow blade like he was trying to dig to China. The metallic shriek echoed through the neighborhood like nails on a chalkboard crossed with a dying cat. They missed 3 entire cul-de-sacs. The Kowalski Circle, home to 5 elderly couples on fixed incomes, sat buried for 18 hours. Harold's driveway got a half-hearted scrape that left 2 inches of packed ice, exactly the kind of surface that turns a routine walk into an ambulance ride. And Dorothy's walkway? Completely abandoned, like Premier had GPS that automatically skipped addresses with residents over 80. At 3 p.m., Dorothy called back. Ezra, I'm so sorry, but I slipped getting my mail. My wrist's swollen up like a purple balloon, and I can barely move my fingers. I was grabbing my keys before she finished talking. Dorothy's driveway was a perfect skating rink, not just unsalted, but gleaming with that mirror-smooth surface that screams lawsuit waiting to happen. Her wrist hung at an angle that made my stomach twist. 83 years old, and she's paying the price for Sterling's cost-effective contractor. Don't you blame yourself, Dorothy said as I helped her into my truck, her good hand gripping my arm. This is on that woman and her penny pinching. While Dorothy got her cast, I started building my case. Photos of Premier's work, if you could call it that. Salt spreader tracks that missed entire sections like a drunk driver weaving down the highway. Plow marks that gouged asphalt instead of clearing snow. Emergency access routes blocked tighter than Sterling's purse strings. The real revelation came when I was photographing Premier's salt truck outside the community center. Something about their spreader pattern looked wrong. Instead of the fine, even coverage that prevents ice formation, they were dumping random patches of coarse white material that crunched under my boots like broken glass. I scooped some into a sample bag and nearly burst out laughing. It wasn't road salt. It was playground sand, the 79-cent per bag stuff from Home Depot that parents use for kids' sandboxes. No melting agents, no ice prevention, just gritty filler that made their work look professional while doing absolutely nothing. Years ago, when I was getting my commercial snow removal license, the instructor had drilled one fact into our heads. Using unauthorized materials on public surfaces isn't just incompetent, it's illegal. Road salt application requires specific permits and chemical handling certification. What Premier was doing, dumping sand and calling it winter treatment, could void every insurance policy in the community. I pulled Premier's business registration that evening. Marcus Webb's company was licensed for general landscaping and grounds maintenance. No winter service credentials, no chemical de-icing permits, no specialized equipment certifications. My lawyer buddy Jake Morrison had explained the liability nightmare during a poker game last spring. When HOAs hire unqualified contractors, individual homeowners become personally liable for accidents on common property. Board members can face personal lawsuits if they ignored obvious safety violations. The legal term is negligent supervision, and it can bankrupt families. I hung up the phone, grinning like a wolf who'd just spotted a wounded deer. Sterling thought she was saving money with her bargain basement contractor. Instead, she'd just exposed every homeowner in Millbrook Estates to personal financial catastrophe. Dorothy's insurance claim would be the first domino. The documentation of Premier's incompetence would be the second. Sterling's professional standards were about to become Exhibit A in a masterclass on what happens when you sacrifice safety for savings. The sweet smell of diesel fumes from my truck reminded me of 30 years protecting these people. Now I was going to protect them a different way, by watching Sterling's house of cards collapse under the weight of her own greed. Because karma, like a good snowstorm, builds slowly before it buries you completely. December's storm hit like God's own sledgehammer, and Premier Property Services folded faster than a house of cards in a tornado. The National Weather Service had been screaming warnings for 3 days. Major winter event, 8 to 12 inches, Christmas week timing that could strand families and kill elderly residents. The kind of storm that separates professionals from pretenders, competence from corporate bullshit. Sterling doubled down on her terrible decision. Tuesday evening, while I monitored radar showing a freight train of white death heading our way, she sent an email blast to all residents. Premier Property Services has assured comprehensive storm response beginning at first light Wednesday. Please avoid unnecessary travel and trust our professional winter management team. Professional. The word tasted like sawdust every time she used it. Wednesday morning, Millbrook Estates looked like the aftermath of a nuclear winter. 10 inches of heavy snow, the kind that breaks tree branches and buries cars completely. Premier's comprehensive response consisted of one truck, singular, operated by the same kid who'd been gouging our asphalt since November. Marcus Webb had overcommitted to 3 communities, and when his other trucks died Tuesday night from neglected maintenance, guess which neighborhood got abandoned? The one paying the lowest rate, naturally. Economics 101, taught through frozen suffering. The kid's truck got stuck before he finished the first driveway. I watched through my kitchen window, sipping coffee that tasted like vindication, as Premier's rust bucket plow slid sideways and died halfway up Maple Circle. Hydraulic fluid leaked bright red against white snow, looking like a crime scene from a very specific kind of murder, the kind where incompetence kills. That's when my phone started ringing. Ezra, Harold Martinez. Maria's chemo appointment is in 2 hours, and we can't even get out of our garage. His voice carried the exhausted desperation of a man watching his wife fight cancer while worrying about something as basic as transportation. What about emergency provisions in Premier's contract? What provisions? Sterling never showed us the fine print. Webb's not answering his phone. By noon, the emergencies cascaded like dominoes designed by Darwin to eliminate the weakest links in Sterling's leadership. Harold Price collapsed with chest pains at 2 p.m. His wife called 911, then me, voice shaking like wind through winter trees. The ambulance can't get up our hill. They're trying to carry Harold down on a stretcher, but they keep slipping in the snow. I was already grabbing my keys, following tire tracks I'd carved 3 hours earlier, when I couldn't stomach watching neighbors suffer for Sterling's greed. The EMTs were knee-deep in powder, struggling with a stretcher across terrain that looked like an obstacle course designed by Satan's winter intern. 47 minutes from 911 call to hospital arrival. In cardiac emergencies, I remembered from my old EMT training, every minute beyond 30 increases mortality risk exponentially. Harold survived, but barely. While Harold fought for his life, the Kowalski kitchen caught fire. Simple grease fire, easily contained if fire trucks could actually reach the scene. But Premier's dead truck still blocked the main road, like a giant middle finger pointed at emergency services. Firefighters ran hoses 300 yards uphill through knee-deep snow, arriving just in time to save the house, but not the kitchen. The beautiful irony? Sterling's driveway remained perfectly clear, serviced by a mysterious private contractor whose truck I'd photographed arriving at 3 a.m. While her community drowned in snow, she maintained her own personal winter wonderland. Thursday morning brought Sterling's panic. She called an emergency HOA meeting, voice higher than usual, demanding explanations for unprecedented weather challenges, and unforeseeable contractor difficulties. Her pharmaceutical sales training kicked in. Deflect blame, minimize liability, control the narrative. Premier encountered equipment failures beyond their control, she announced to the 12 residents who'd managed to dig out enough to attend. Weather events of this magnitude exceed normal operational parameters. Dorothy Finch, arm still in a cast from November's ice skating accident, courtesy of Sterling's cost-cutting, raised her good hand. Ezra's family never had equipment failures. 30 years, never missed a storm. Sterling's smile looked like it had been carved from ice. Mrs. Finch, comparing modern professional services to informal neighborhood arrangements isn't productive. I sat in the back, documenting her performance with the same precision I'd used photographing Premier's failures. Every deflection, every excuse, every attempt to blame weather instead of accepting responsibility for hiring incompetent contractors. My counterattack was already in motion. I'd spent the morning creating a comprehensive incident report. Emergency response delays, property damage, medical complications, infrastructure failures. Each photograph told the story Sterling didn't want told. What happens when you sacrifice safety for savings? The really sweet part? I'd filed formal complaints with the County Emergency Services Coordinator, documenting how Sterling's contractor choice had endangered lives and property. Let her explain professional standards to investigators who actually understood what those words meant. Sterling thought she was managing a crisis. She had no idea she was digging her own grave, one excuse at a time. January slammed Millbrook Estates like a collection agency with a grudge, and Sterling decided the best way to solve her contractor nightmare was making everyone else pay for the privilege of freezing. The special assessment notice arrived Tuesday morning, thick manila envelopes that felt heavy as death sentences. 40% dues increase, effective February 1st. No payment plans, no mercy, no consideration that half our residents were choosing between medication and heating oil. Sterling's justification read like corporate propaganda. Enhanced winter service protocols require additional investment in professional equipment and emergency response capabilities. Translation: Premier screwed up so spectacularly that residents needed to fund Sterling's face-saving operation. Dorothy Finch called before my coffee had time to cool, voice shaking like leaves in a nor'easter. $2,000 by next month, Ezra. I can't swing that. Hell, most of us can't. $2,000 might as well have been $2 million for folks living on Social Security and stubbornness. Sterling was forcing elderly residents to choose between their homes and survival, and using HOA legal funds to hire Lancaster's most ruthless foreclosure attorney to make sure they understood the stakes. The smell of desperation was thicker than diesel exhaust in our neighborhood. Thursday brought rebellion brewing stronger than truck stop coffee at Mickey's Diner. 18 residents crowded into red vinyl booths, the air heavy with bacon grease and justified fury, faces grim as undertakers discussing Sterling's latest assault on their wallets. "She's bleeding us dry to cover her incompetence," Harold Martinez growled, stirring sugar into coffee that could dissolve paint. His hands shook slightly, whether from anger or the strain of covering his wife's medical bills, I couldn't tell. Eddie Kowalski spread Premier's original contract across Formica, sticky with decades of syrup and broken dreams. "Look at this fine print they buried. Emergency calls cost $200 an hour, minimum 4-hour billing. They could charge $800 to rescue their own stuck truck." I studied the predatory terms while conversation buzzed around me like angry wasps. Premier's contract was more exploitative than a payday loan operation. No guaranteed response times, unlimited emergency fees, zero liability for the disasters they'd already caused. Sterling had essentially signed us up for financial extortion, disguised as professional snow removal. The game changer came when Dorothy pulled out a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. "My late husband kept everything from developing this neighborhood, including documents Sterling obviously never read." She spread yellowed papers across the table like a card shark, revealing a royal flush. Original HOA Charter, 1987, says any service contract over $5,000 annually requires majority resident vote at properly noticed meetings. My coffee suddenly tasted like victory. Sterling never brought Premier to a resident vote. "Gets better," Dorothy continued, finger tracing legal text with surgical precision. Charter prohibits board members from receiving financial benefit from vendor relationships. If she took kickbacks, every decision is automatically void. The mini twist hit when Eddie found the enforcement clause buried in legal language. Any contract signed without proper resident approval can be terminated immediately. No penalties, full refund of payments. But Sterling wasn't done fighting dirty. Friday afternoon, she fired back harder than a shotgun blast. Certified letters arrived threatening harassment charges against residents who interfered with board operations. She'd hired a private investigator to research Dorothy's resistance group, claiming our kitchen table meetings constituted unlawful conspiracy to undermine community governance. The pharmaceutical shark was using intimidation tactics she'd probably learned closing hospital deals. Threaten, pressure, isolate the opposition until they surrendered. Wrong neighborhood, lady. My counterattack was already rolling. While Sterling played corporate hardball, I was building a legal fortress. Every charter violation documented. Every resident hardship recorded. Every premier failure cataloged with timestamps and photographs that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Jake Morrison, my attorney buddy who'd been itching for an HOA corruption case since law school, practically salivated when I showed him our evidence. Charter violations this clear-cut, elderly financial abuse, potential kickback schemes. Ezra, this isn't just a lawsuit, it's a career-making public interest case. Saturday morning, our kitchen table rebellion had grown from 18 residents to 37. Word was spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire through drought-dead timber, powered by shared outrage and Sterling's own escalating threats. The beautiful irony? Every legal threat she made, every intimidation tactic she deployed, just added evidence to our growing case file. Sterling was essentially building our lawsuit for us, one arrogant mistake at a time. Sunday evening, I sat in my truck, watching snow fall through streetlight halos, thinking about my brother Magnus, and how he'd fought overseas while I fought snowstorms at home. Different battles, same principle. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when, especially when, they have all the apparent power. Sterling thought she was crushing resistance through financial warfare and legal intimidation. She had no idea she'd just declared war on people who'd survived Pennsylvania winters, neighborhood politics, and decades of life's hardest punches. We weren't backing down. We were gearing up for the fight of our lives. The smoking gun arrived wrapped in 40-year-old legal documents that smelled like dust, secrets, and sweet revenge. Dorothy had been excavating her late husband's files like an archaeologist hunting buried treasure, and Wednesday morning, she struck gold that would make Fort Knox jealous. Her kitchen table looked like a detective's evidence board. Manila folders, yellowed papers, and the kind of documentation that destroys political careers and sends people to federal prison. Ezra, get over here now. Dorothy's voice carried the excitement of someone who just discovered their lottery ticket was worth millions. I found something that'll fry Sterling like bacon on a summer sidewalk. I expected another piece of the charter puzzle. What I found was a legal nuclear weapon disguised as boring paperwork. Document 1. Sterling's vendor disclosure form, filed when she became HOA president. Squeaky clean, declaring zero financial relationships with potential service providers. The kind of government form that carries felony penalties for lying, which most honest people take seriously. Sterling wasn't most people. Document 2 made my hands shake like I was holding dynamite. Bank records Dorothy's husband had accidentally kept from his treasurer days. Same routing numbers as Sterling's accounts. Same bank where HOA funds flowed. But this deposit slip was dated 6 months before Premier got our contract. $2,400 from M-Web Enterprises. She was getting paid before she even fired you, Dorothy said, her voice sharp enough to cut frozen butter. This whole disaster was premeditated. The third document made my coffee taste like liquid vindication. Sterling's Pharmaceutical Consulting LLC, registered 2 weeks after moving to Millbrook Estates. Business purpose listed as Healthcare Industry Vendor Relationship Management. She'd literally weaponized her hospital corruption skills against her own neighbors. Webb's company had been paying Sterling's LLC $400 monthly since August, 2 months before she'd destroyed my family business at that October meeting. The payments continued through January, meaning she'd profited from every emergency, every disaster, every broken bone caused by Premier's incompetence. Dorothy's weathered finger traced the paper trail like she was following breadcrumbs through a forest of corporate fraud. She turned our suffering into her personal ATM. Harold's heart attack, Dorothy's broken wrist, the Kowalski fire, she made money from all of it. The charter violation was so clear-cut it practically glowed. Board members receiving financial benefit from vendor relationships faced immediate removal and personal liability for all damages. Sterling hadn't just bent the rules, she'd snapped them like twigs and danced on the pieces. But the real beauty was buried in legal language from 1987. Vendor contracts procured through board member fraud could be terminated immediately with full restitution plus penalties. We could fire Premier today and force them to refund every penny they'd stolen, plus damages for their disasters. The power dynamic had just shifted like a landslide in slow motion. Sterling thought she controlled the board, the budget, and the community's future. She had no idea that while she'd been threatening foreclosures and hiring private investigators, we'd been assembling evidence that could send her to prison. All those pharmaceutical sales tactics, all that corporate manipulation, all her threats about professional standards, worthless when faced with federal fraud charges and charter violations documented in her own handwriting. The beautiful irony, Sterling's business expertise had created the perfect paper trail. Every payment, every contract modification, every consultation fee meticulously recorded because pharmaceutical companies demand documentation. Her professional habits had built our case better than any prosecutor could have hoped. I sat there, staring at evidence that would destroy Sterling's regime and restore sanity to our neighborhood, thinking about how greed always leaves tracks. Sterling had gotten so confident in her manipulation skills, she'd forgotten that some secrets don't stay buried forever. She still thought she was winning, still believed her financial warfare would break elderly resistance. She was about to discover what happened when you pick a fight with people who'd survived decades of Pennsylvania winters, neighborhood politics, and life's hardest punches. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The weather forecast that dropped Thursday evening looked like Christmas morning wrapped in a Category 5 hurricane, and I was about to give Sterling the gift that keeps on giving, total humiliation served at sub-zero temperatures. My meteorologist buddy Rick Chen had been tracking the mother of all storms brewing over the Great Lakes, the kind of atmospheric monster that gets its own Weather Channel documentary. "Ezra, this beast's going to rewrite the record books," Rick said over beers at Murphy's Tavern, foam clinging to his mustache like miniature snowdrifts. 3 to 4 feet, sustained winds 50 miles per hour, temperature dropping to -15. It'll hit Saturday night and dump its entire load before dawn Sunday. Perfect timing for Sterling's final exam in crisis management, a test she was engineered to fail more spectacularly than the Hindenburg. Friday morning, I positioned my equipment like a chess grandmaster setting up checkmate. Main plow truck parked at Sunoco, just outside Millbrook Estates, diesel engine block heater plugged in and purring like a contented cat. Close enough to respond within minutes, far enough to avoid Sterling's legal threats about unauthorized commercial activity. Tony stationed his backup rig at the fire station, where Chief Martinez had offered parking in exchange for priority road clearing during emergencies. Rick positioned his salt spreader truck behind Mickey's Diner, where the owner, Mrs. Kowalski, promised hot coffee and a front row seat to Premier's inevitable meltdown. The beautiful thing about 3 decades fighting Pennsylvania winters is understanding exactly how storms kill inexperienced crews. Cheap hydraulic fluid freezes at 20 below, turning plow blades into expensive paperweights. Bargain basement salt spreaders jam when moisture hits the mechanism. Rookie drivers panic when visibility drops to 0, and winds turn snowflakes into frozen bullets. Premier's rust bucket equipment would surrender faster than France in 1940. Dorothy orchestrated our legal blitzkrieg with surgical precision, her kitchen table transformed into mission control for Sterling's destruction. Saturday morning, she'd file emergency injunction papers, citing board member fraud and demanding immediate contract termination. Our evidence package, bank records proving kickbacks, charter violations, vendor corruption documentation, would be warming a judge's desk before the first snowflake committed atmospheric suicide. Timing is everything in warfare and weather, Dorothy explained, spreading legal documents across Formica that had absorbed 40 years of neighborhood secrets. Her coffee could strip paint from a battleship, and her smile could melt tungsten. Storm hits Saturday night, Premier abandons us by Sunday noon. Sterling starts hemorrhaging credibility by Monday morning. Here's what most homeowners never learn about emergency contractor laws. During declared weather disasters, property owners can hire immediate snow removal services without HOA approval if designated contractors fail to respond within 6 hours. The statute was designed to prevent exactly the kind of life-threatening negligence Sterling had institutionalized. My attorney buddy, Jake Morrison, had been practically drooling over our case like a starving man eyeing a prime ribeye. Federal mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud elderly residents, violation of fiduciary duty. Sterling's looking at 5 to 10 years if we prosecute aggressively. We'd prepared individual damage claims for every resident Sterling's incompetence had injured. Harold's cardiac emergency delays, Dorothy's broken wrist, the Kowalski fire damage, missed medical appointments, stranded emergency vehicles. Each incident documented with photos sharp enough to make insurance adjusters weep, medical records that told stories of preventable suffering, witness statements that painted Sterling as the architect of systematic community endangerment. The technical strategy was poetry disguised as snow removal. When Premier inevitably fled during the storm, and they would, because their equipment couldn't survive severe weather any better than a paper umbrella in a tornado, we document their abandonment with military precision. 6 hours of non-response would trigger emergency service provisions. That's when I'd return with my crews, not as the vengeful fired contractor, but as emergency responders, protecting life and property during declared weather disasters. Every driveway cleared, every access route opened, every elderly neighbor safely reached would be time-stamped and photographed as evidence of what competent snow removal actually looked like. Meanwhile, Sterling would be trapped in her mansion, watching her community freeze while her private contractor maintained only her driveway, like some kind of winter apartheid system. The visual contrast would damn her more effectively than any courtroom testimony. 46 families buried alive, while their HOA president enjoyed personal service that cost more than most people's rent. Saturday evening brought satisfaction so pure, it should have been bottled and sold as premium whiskey. Equipment positioned like artillery pieces targeting Sterling's credibility. Legal ammunition locked and loaded. Media contacts primed for what could become Pennsylvania's biggest HOA corruption scandal since the Philadelphia Housing Authority debacle. Weather radar showed 3 feet of justice, bearing down on Sterling's perfectly climate-controlled world, like God's own snow shovel aimed at her front door. I'd learned strategic patience during EMT training. Sometimes you have to let disasters develop before you can resolve them. Sterling had engineered a crisis that would expose her corruption more effectively than any federal investigation. All I needed was readiness to clean up her mess, both literally and metaphorically. The storm was coming. Premier would collapse. Sterling would panic like a pharmaceutical executive facing SEC investigators. And justice would be served by the truckload, with proper documentation and emergency protocols that would make her professional standards look like amateur hour at a clown convention. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of ominous calm that makes seasoned storm watchers check their equipment twice and pray their insurance premiums are current. Sterling, apparently, had missed the memo about preparing for atmospheric warfare. Instead of focusing on storm readiness, she was busy trying to destroy the evidence of her own corruption, like a mob accountant burning ledgers before the FBI raid. Dorothy's neighbors saw her loading boxes of documents into her BMW's trunk at 6 a.m., designer heels clicking against ice-covered asphalt like a metronome counting down to her own destruction. But Sterling's real desperation showed when she called an emergency board meeting for Saturday afternoon, 6 hours before the storm was scheduled to hit. The agenda was pure panic, disguised as professional crisis management. Emergency contract modifications to enhance winter response capabilities. Translation: she was trying to rewrite Premier's contract to cover her ass when they inevitably abandoned the community during the blizzard. We need expanded emergency authority for the board president during severe weather events, Sterling announced to the 3 board members who'd managed to attend, her voice carrying the brittle confidence of someone trying to convince herself as much as her audience. The community center smelled like fear and industrial carpet cleaner, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying insects. Harold Martinez, still recovering from his December heart attack, raised a shaking hand. Vivienne, shouldn't we be preparing for the storm instead of rewriting contracts? Sterling's smile could have flash-frozen a lake. "Harold, professional management requires adaptive planning. I'm proposing emergency provisions that protect the community from unfortunate contractor abandonment scenarios." Adaptive planning. Even facing disaster, she couldn't resist corporate doublespeak. The really beautiful part was watching her scramble to legitimize what everyone knew was coming. She'd gotten advance warning from Webb that Premier's equipment was failing, that his crew was already committed to higher-paying contracts in Lancaster County, that Millbrook Estates would be left to freeze while he chased more profitable disasters. Sterling knew Premier would abandon us, and she was trying to create legal cover for the catastrophe she'd engineered. Meanwhile, her intimidation campaign escalated like a pharmaceutical sales pitch, targeting desperate hospital administrators. Certified letters arrived Saturday morning, threatening immediate legal action against residents who'd signed Dorothy's petition. She'd hired a private investigator to photograph anyone attending our kitchen table meetings, claiming our resistance constituted harassment of board members. But Sterling's masterstroke of desperation came when she contacted my other snow removal clients, spreading poison about my unstable behavior and litigious tendencies. 3 commercial accounts got calls suggesting I was emotionally compromised by military service and might abandon contracts during emergencies. She was trying to destroy my entire livelihood, not just my Millbrook contract. Wrong move, lady. Dead wrong. My counterstrike was already in motion, coordinated with the precision of a military operation my brother Magnus would have admired. While Sterling played corporate hardball, I was building a fortress of legal ammunition that would survive any court challenge. I'd spent Friday evening with Jake Morrison, my attorney friend who specialized in David versus Goliath community battles. We'd prepared a comprehensive lawsuit targeting not just Sterling's fraud, but her systematic harassment of elderly residents, her abuse of HOA legal funds, and her violation of board member fiduciary duties. The really sweet part? Every threat she made, every intimidation tactic she deployed, just added evidence to our growing case. Sterling was essentially building our prosecution file, one arrogant mistake at a time. But the knockout punch was what Dorothy discovered in Sterling's hastily revised board meeting minutes. In her panic to create legal cover for Premier's abandonment, Sterling had accidentally documented her own kickback arrangement. The minutes referenced ongoing consulting relationships with winter service providers that were supposed to be deleted from the final version. Professional pharmaceutical sales training, apparently, didn't include courses on covering up municipal fraud. Saturday evening, as weather radar showed the storm of the century bearing down on Pennsylvania like God's own judgment, I positioned my equipment for the final act of Sterling's downfall. Trucks fueled and ready, crews on standby, cameras positioned to document every moment of Premier's inevitable collapse. The irony was thicker than the approaching snow clouds. Sterling thought she was managing a crisis, protecting her position, controlling the narrative. She had no idea that while she'd been threatening residents and rewriting contracts, we'd been assembling evidence that would destroy her completely. Every document she'd tried to hide, every threat she'd made, every attempt to silence opposition had created the paper trail that would send her to prison. Her own professional habits, the meticulous record-keeping that pharmaceutical companies demanded, had built our case better than any prosecutor could have hoped. The storm was 6 hours away. Premier's equipment was already showing signs of mechanical failure. Sterling's private contractor had confirmed service only for her personal driveway, and justice was about to be delivered by the truckload, served colder than Sterling's heart and more relentless than Pennsylvania winter. Sunday arrived like the apocalypse's understudy. 3.5 feet of snow, winds howling like banshees with attitude problems, and temperatures that could freeze antifreeze solid. Premier Property Services lasted exactly 4 hours before running away faster than tourists fleeing a Detroit rest stop. Marcus Webb's crew showed up at dawn with equipment that belonged in a museum of mechanical failure. Their lead truck died in the first driveway, hydraulic fluid frozen solid because Webb had bought the cheapest grade available. Their salt spreader jammed before they'd cleared a single street, ice formation clogging the mechanism, like arterial blockage in a chain smoker's heart. By 10 a.m., Webb's remaining truck was stuck sideways across Maple Circle, abandoned like a beached whale, while his crew fled to warmer contracts in Lancaster County. The beautiful irony? Sterling's cut-rate contractor had literally blocked emergency vehicle access while running away from the job they'd been paid to complete. That's when Sterling's real panic started showing. I was monitoring emergency scanner traffic from my kitchen, sipping coffee that tasted like vindication, when the first 911 call came through. Mrs. Patterson, 87, had fallen in her bathroom and couldn't get up. Ambulance dispatch tried 3 different routes into Millbrook Estates before admitting defeat. Every access road was blocked by abandoned Premier equipment or 3 feet of untouched snow. Dispatch, we need alternative access to 1247 Maple Circle. Standard routes are impassable due to contractor equipment failure. Alternative access, the kind of bureaucratic language that means someone's going to die because some idiot didn't do their job. Sterling's phone started ringing like a fire alarm in hell. Ezra? This is Vivian Sterling. Her voice carried the desperation of someone watching their perfectly constructed world collapse in real time. We have a situation with our winter contractor. Premier seems to be experiencing equipment difficulties. Even facing community disaster, she couldn't abandon corporate euphemisms. What kind of difficulties? I asked, though I'd been watching Premier's failure through binoculars from my upstairs window. Their trucks, they're not responding to service requests. Residents are calling the HOA office and we need immediate assistance. Her pharmaceutical sales confidence had evaporated faster than morning fog in August. Interesting. What happened to your professional standards and comprehensive coverage? The silence stretched longer than a Pennsylvania winter, filled with the sound of Sterling's credibility dying a slow, painful death. Ezra, please, people are trapped. Mrs. Patterson needs medical attention. The Martinez family can't get to Maria's chemotherapy appointment, and the access roads are completely blocked. Sounds like a job for professional contractors with proper documentation, I said, tasting every word like expensive wine. Have you tried calling Marcus Webb? His company isn't responding to calls. Of course they weren't. Webb's operation was bankrupt, his equipment was failed, and his crew was already fleeing to contracts that actually paid enough to maintain working trucks. Sterling's bargain basement contractor had abandoned her community the moment conditions required actual competence. The really beautiful part came when I drove past Sterling's mansion during the storm's peak. While 46 families sat buried and abandoned, her driveway was perfectly clear, serviced by the private contractor she'd hired to maintain her personal winter wonderland. The visual contrast was more damning than any courtroom evidence. Community president enjoying luxury service while her constituents froze. But Sterling wasn't done digging her own grave. Desperate to control the narrative, she started spreading the blame thicker than peanut butter on week-old bread. Email blasts to residents claiming Premier's failures were due to unprecedented weather conditions beyond normal operational parameters. Social media posts suggesting community members were unrealistic in their winter service expectations. She even had the audacity to suggest that residents who'd complained about Premier's service were undermining community harmony and creating unreasonable contractor pressure. Unreasonable pressure, like expecting snow removal contractors to actually remove snow. Meanwhile, my documentation operation was capturing every moment of Sterling's leadership failure with the precision of a nature photographer tracking endangered species. Timestamps showing Premier's abandonment, photos of blocked emergency routes, audio recordings of 911 calls that couldn't be completed because Sterling's contractor had fled. The coup de grace came when Dorothy filed our emergency injunction with the county court at 2 p.m. Sunday, right as the storm reached its peak fury. The judge, probably sitting in his own properly plowed driveway, granted immediate review of our fraud evidence and Premier contract termination. By 4 p.m., Sterling's reign of incompetence was legally over. The contract that had nearly killed her neighbors was void. Her kickback scheme was under federal investigation, and her community was about to discover what competent snow removal actually looked like. Because at 4:01 p.m., emergency service provisions kicked in, and the Blackwood brothers were officially back in business. Sunday at 4 p.m., when emergency service provisions legally kicked in, and I fired up my plow truck for the first time in 8 months, the sound was sweeter than church bells on Christmas morning. The storm was still raging like God's own tantrum, but 46 families were about to discover the difference between professional snow removal and whatever the hell Premier had been pretending to do. My crew rolled into Millbrook Estates like cavalry arriving at the last minute in a Western movie. Except instead of horses, we rode diesel-powered Justice with heated cabs and satellite radio. Within 2 hours, we'd cleared every emergency access route, opened every driveway, and restored civilization to a community that had been abandoned by Sterling's bargain basement contractor. The visual transformation was more dramatic than a Hollywood makeover show, from buried disaster zone to perfectly maintained winter wonderland. But the real show started Monday morning at the emergency HOA meeting Sterling called to explain the weekend's catastrophe. The community center was packed tighter than a subway car during rush hour. 43 residents had managed to attend, faces grim as undertakers discussing Sterling's political funeral. Local Channel 8 news crew set up cameras in the back, their reporter looking like she'd stumbled onto the story of her career. County Emergency Services Coordinator Bill Henderson sat in the front row with a clipboard full of violations and a expression that suggested someone was about to get crucified. Sterling clicked to the podium in her designer heels, looking like a pharmaceutical sales shark who just realized the hospital administrators were actually FBI agents wearing wires. Ladies and gentlemen, this weekend's weather event presented unprecedented challenges that exceeded normal operational parameters, she began, her voice carrying the desperate confidence of someone trying to sell cancer medication to people who'd already died. Unprecedented challenges. Even facing complete humiliation, she couldn't speak plain English. Dorothy Finch raised her cast-wrapped arm like a battle flag. Vivian, honey, the only unprecedented thing was how fast your contractor ran away when actual work needed doing. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd like dominoes falling in slow motion. Sheriff Deputy Mike Kowalski, yes, related to our fire victim, stood up from the back row. Mrs. Sterling, I've got a warrant here for financial records related to vendor kickback allegations. We'll need to examine all HOA banking documents and your personal consulting company records. The color drained from Sterling's face faster than blood from a stuck pig. But the real mic drop moment came when Bill Henderson from Emergency Services took the microphone with all the gentle warmth of an Arctic blizzard. Mrs. Sterling, Premier Property Services has been removed from our approved contractor list due to equipment abandonment during declared emergencies. Their business license is under review for fraud violations, and your community's winter service contract is void under state emergency response statutes. Henderson paused, letting that sink in like water into concrete. However, Blackwood Brothers Snow and Ice responded to emergency calls within 37 minutes of legal authorization, cleared all access routes within 4 hours, and restored full community accessibility before sunset Sunday. Their performance exceeded state emergency response standards. The room erupted like a volcano filled with vindicated neighbors. Applause, cheers, and the kind of emotional release that comes when justice finally arrives fashionably late, but dressed to kill. Sterling tried one last, desperate sales pitch. The board will need to review new contractor proposals through proper bidding procedures. Actually, Dorothy interrupted, standing with the dignity of someone who'd survived 83 Pennsylvania winters and one fraud-loving HOA president. The board voted this morning to remove you as president. Unanimous decision, 3-0, not counting your vote since you're under criminal investigation. She pulled out the legal documents like a magician revealing the final trick. Emergency charter provisions allow immediate removal of board members facing fraud charges. Your consulting company, your kickback scheme, your vendor corruption. It's all documented in these bank records and federal court filings. The Channel 8 reporter was practically vibrating with excitement, her cameraman capturing every second of Sterling's public destruction. Furthermore, Dorothy continued with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor, the original 1987 charter requires any illegally procured contracts to be terminated with full restitution. Premier owes this community every penny they were paid, plus damages for emergency response failures. Sterling stood there looking like a pharmaceutical executive who'd just been informed her best-selling drug caused spontaneous human combustion. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. No corporate doublespeak adequate for complete professional annihilation. Sheriff Deputy Kowalski stepped forward with handcuffs that gleamed under fluorescent lights. "Vivian Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud, violation of fiduciary duty, and mail fraud related to HOA vendor contracts." As they led Sterling away in handcuffs, she slipped on the community center steps, unsalted, naturally, and face-planted into a snowbank like karma's own exclamation point. The crowd's laughter followed her all the way to the patrol car. 6 months later, Millbrook Estates looked like the community Sterling had always promised but never delivered. Except now, it was managed by people who actually gave a damn about their neighbors instead of their bank accounts. Dorothy Finch had been elected HOA president by unanimous vote, running on a platform of common sense, honest accounting, and never again trusting pharmaceutical sales sharks with community management. Her first official act was signing a 5-year contract with Blackwood Brothers Snow and Ice at fair market rates with transparent emergency provisions and zero kickback opportunities. Sterling's legal reckoning played out like a textbook case in how not to defraud elderly residents. Federal mail fraud charges earned her 18 months in minimum security prison, plus full restitution of $24,000 in illegal consulting fees and $47,000 in community damages. Her pharmaceutical sales license got permanently revoked, and her consulting company dissolved faster than cheap toilet paper in a rainstorm. Marcus Webb's Premier Property Services collapsed entirely, facing EPA violations for illegal chemical dumping, fraud charges across 3 counties, and equipment liens that left him driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic instead of the gleaming contractor trucks he'd never properly maintained. The poetic justice was thicker than winter molasses. The man who'd abandoned communities during emergencies couldn't even afford emergency road service for his own broken-down car. But the real victory was what Dorothy's leadership brought to our neighborhood. HOA dues returned to reasonable levels under transparent budgeting that eliminated mysterious administrative fees and emergency assessments. New charter amendments required resident approval for any contract over $3,000 and mandated annual audits by independent accountants who couldn't be bought with pharmaceutical sales charm. The monthly community meetings transformed from Sterling's corporate-style presentations into actual neighborhood gatherings where people discussed real problems and found practical solutions. Kids organized snow fort building contests. Adults started potluck dinners that lasted until midnight. The elderly residents who'd been terrorized by foreclosure threats were now valued advisors whose experience guided community decisions. My business thrived like a garden after spring rain. Word about our emergency response during the Great Blizzard spread through 3 counties, bringing new contracts and referrals that doubled our revenue. More importantly, I'd hired 2 additional employees: Tony Rodriguez, a veteran from Iraq who understood both service and snow removal, and Sarah Martinez, Harold's daughter, who'd graduated from Penn State with an environmental engineering degree and wanted to modernize our salt application methods for maximum efficiency and minimum environmental impact. But the project that meant the most was the Magnus Blackwood Memorial Fund, named after my brother and funded partly by Sterling's restitution payments. The program provides free snow removal for disabled veterans and elderly residents on fixed incomes, ensuring no one in our coverage area ever faces the choice between staying warm and staying housed. Every winter storm season, we clear an additional 47 driveways at no charge. Dorothy coordinates the list, prioritizing veterans, seniors, and families facing medical emergencies. Last year, we prevented 6 ambulance delays, cleared paths for 32 medical appointments, and ensured that Harold Martinez never missed another dialysis session due to snow-blocked roads. The fund also sponsors an annual community winter festival, where kids learn snow safety, adults share storm preparation tips, and everyone celebrates surviving another Pennsylvania winter together. Local businesses donate food and supplies, volunteer firefighters provide emergency response training, and the mayor usually shows up to present commendation letters to residents who exemplify community spirit. Sterling's former mansion got sold to pay legal bills and restitution costs. The new owners, a retired teacher and his nurse wife, immediately joined the volunteer snow shovel brigade that helps elderly neighbors with walkway clearing. The contrast was beautiful. Where Sterling had isolated herself behind private contractors and corporate arrogance, the new residents integrated into community life like neighbors are supposed to do. This Christmas, watching kids build snow forts in the same streets where Sterling had nearly let them freeze. I thought about lessons learned and justice served. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something better from the wreckage of what came before.
You know what gets me about Elsa's story? It wasn't the snow that buried Sterling in the end. It was her own paperwork. See, pharmaceutical salespeople, they were trained to document everything. Every meeting, every payment, every relationship. Sterling thought those skills would protect her. But they ended up building the prosecution case better than any detective could manage. 18 months in federal prison and $24,000 in restitution. That's what happens when you turn your neighbor's safety into your personal ATM. But here's the part that really matters. Dorothy Fink. That's 83 years old woman with a broken wrist. She's running that HOA now. Unanimous vote. Asa didn't just get his contract back. He's doubled his business and started the Manus Blackwood Memorial Fund. Free snow removal for veterans and seniors, named after his brother who died in Afghanistan. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. But I keep thinking about the 47 families trapped in their driveway, where Sterling Manson stayed perfectly clear. That image should haunt every HOA board member who think they're untouchable. How many of you are dealing with a Sterling right now? Sometimes who talk about professional standards while cutting corners that could kill your neighbors. Drop your story in the comments because these people count on you staying quiet. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about regular folks who refuse to let petty tyrants destroy their communities. Because in America, the snow always melts eventually. But what you do during the storm, that's what people remember forever.